I'm Elizabeth Curry Chandler. I'm a journalist and writer who, together with my husband, co-founded the website Goodreads, an adventure that completely took over our lives. Today, I'm editor-in-chief of Goodreads, and I'm still doing what I've always loved to do, interviewing and writing about creative and dynamic people. For this podcast, I'm talking to the world's most interesting people about what they're reading and why. Anne Lamott is a New York Times bestselling author. She's inspired people for decades with books like Bird by Bird, Instructions on Writing and Life, Traveling Mercies, Some Thoughts on Faith, and Operating Instructions, a journal of my son's first year. She's also written 7 novels. Anne writes about difficult subjects: faith, hope, being a single mom, depression, alcoholism. Her work is wise and brutally honest. Often it's comforting, but it also rides that edge where things can feel uncomfortable enough to be very real. Her latest book dives headfirst into the tricky business of being positive in the modern world. It's called Almost Everything: Notes on Hope. I met her at her home in Marin to talk about her book and 2 others that she recommends for us. Thanks so much for having me at your house. This is so cool to get to sit in your sunroom and see your bookshelves and
my dog.
Meet your dog, yeah. So we talked a while ago when you were promoting Some Assembly Required, a journal of my son's first son. And I always laugh when I remember that conversation because we got a little derailed from the interview and you started giving me advice on my life because I had a newborn at home. And I remember you started telling me I needed to put my oxygen mask on first and, how to take care of myself. And then I was reading this book, your newest, Almost Everything, Notes on Hope. And you talk in the book a lot about how you like to help people. Mm-hmm. And you say, my lifelong and core belief, right after the conviction that I was defective, mildly annoying, and better than everyone else, was that my help was helpful.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, you'll learn after you have a teenager that your help is not that helpful, that they recoil from your help. And that I've learned ever since that my help is really often intrusive. There's a saying, it might be in almost everything, that help is the sunny side of control.
And do you think there is a way to help the people you love?
Well, first of all, it's so incredible to wait until they ask. That's always a tell. That if people aren't asking for advice, it's sort of a violation to jump in there, like as if your ideas are good ideas. I always tell people I have a disease of good ideas, that I'm convinced I have good ideas for everybody. I have good ideas for you, and I don't think we've ever met before.
No.
And I have good ideas for our engineer, Jeremy. And it's just like the sickness I think women were raised with, certainly in the 50s, that you were a helper, that you were a big girl helper.
So one of the first question I probably should ask you, though, is why did you decide to write this book?
This book on hope. Not to politicize it, but after the last election, I felt that everyone I came upon was in despair like I'd never seen before, in this profound anxiety. And people just felt like powerless and doomed. And in fact, the original title of the book was Doomed. It was called Doomed, A Book of Hope. And my editor thought it was hilarious, but wouldn't go for it. And
I'm so glad you didn't name it Doomed.
Yeah. And so it's kind of, one of the very first chapters says that all truth is paradox. That we're beautiful, just magical, delightful children of God, and we're all just kind of a mess. None of us know what we're doing, and we screw up right and left. And I think that the truth is that these are incredibly scary times, the scariest I remember, and I just turned 64. And I've never had so much hope. There's so much science going on that really helps to save us. There's so much consciousness raising around all marginalized groups. Who knows what my 9-year-old grandchild will come to discover as his identity, but the consciousness raising around whatever that is profound. So I sort of feel like a street minister sometimes, and I kind of lumber around and people seem to want to talk. And over again, they just felt hopeless. So I thought, well, I'll just write every single thing I know that is at all hopeful, such as that the truth is medicine. And there's so little of it in the popular culture. And so for people to tell a little truth, even if it's uncomfortable, is a gift.
I liked how you wrote, you have a chapter called Don't Let Them Get You to Hate Them.
Mm-hmm.
And once read a book that talked about joy as a form of resistance. And personally, I try and think about that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't ever want to be a jaded person. And you talk in the book about the magnificent defeat, the book, The Magnificent Defeat, which is about
Lewis,
yeah, which is about surrender.
Mm-hmm.
That's such a difficult concept. I mean, how do you think people should approach the concept of surrender?
Well, this one chapter arose like all my progress. Any healing or progress arrive from the pain of not changing. I just got into such a toxic place with the politics of the current era, and I was just filled with hate. And it's kind of invigorating, it's kind of like adrenalizing, and I don't mind it. And then I realized I was just toxic. And so I started to become available for a new way of being, and I don't have a beautiful Hallmark card way of surrender. I cross my arms and I say to God, I say, okay, fine, what? And it's just like, pay attention, open your heart, pay attention, and the teachings will come. And it all has to do with realizing how powerless we are, and how most of my struggles have to do with trying to make that not be true, that I'm powerless, and that I'd rather feel enraged than powerless. I'd rather just feel revengeful, anything. And as soon as I'm willing to realize I'm just powerless, then I can go back to being a really healthy, good girl helper.
Yeah. So I did love the chapter about the writing.
Oh, thanks.
And I love that you tell people not to be precious in their writing. Mm-hmm. You say things about, kill your darlings. Most of it is getting your butt in the chair. Mm-hmm. And that Joyce Carol Oates has no issues as a writer, which also made me laugh, because I remember we interviewed her and we sent off the interview questions and they came back like instantaneously with these huge long answers. Yeah. And we were like, this woman must be superhuman. It was
I think the chapter begins that everybody has a really, really hard time with their writing, except for Joyce Carol Oates. I'm sure she has issues and problems, but she's brilliant, and she's probably written a book since you got here.
Probably.
In the last hour, yeah.
But I mean, do you think it's ever too late to be a writer?
Oh, God, no. I think the opposite. I think that if it's in you, that inside nudge to tell your story, or to write some poems, or to try this short story or novel that you've just started in college 50 years ago, and you don't do it, then it's going to really break your heart. And if you do it, it's going to be weird, because it's not going to come out nearly as good as you had hoped. So that's usually what my writing classes and this chapter on writing and almost everything are about. Like, it's going to go badly. And that's why it's so courageous and touching that you're going to do it anyway. But the horrible news is you got to get your butt in the chair, and you got to stay there. There's that old saying that you can't get lost if you don't have a destination. People are always saying, don't you have an outline? I say, no, I don't know what I'm doing. How would I be able to do an outline? I'll find out what I'm doing by doing the writing. Well, they'll say, doesn't that just make you so tense? And I'll say, yeah, totally. Look at me, So
yeah, I feel like a lot of writers I've interviewed, like I remember I interviewed Khaled Hosseini, and he said he'd write like 150 pages and then he'd reread it, go back and then maybe start at page 70 and then go in another. I mean, it sounded like he was writing in circles all around until he figured out that final thread.
Yeah.
And that was inspiring to me. And also I was a little bit blown away by the amount of work he was clearly putting in.
I think it's really inspiring to tell a group of people that no one knows what they're doing, that join the club. It's like, welcome to the monkey house, where you sit down, you have an idea, you have an image, maybe you have a memory, you heard some dialogue and it got you thinking, and you just start there. You start where you are, but you make yourself stay in the chair. You have to turn off the phone. And that kills people. I'd say that's the main deal breaker, is that you can't be writing in any way with integrity unless you've turned off the phone. And that's like so painful.
Why don't we talk about the other two books you recommended? Okay. I wanted to kind of know which questions they answered for you. Were these two books that changed your life or impacted you in some way?
So our mediary, the person, Lydia, who put you and me together, said, can you pick a couple of books that you would love to talk about? And I happened to be reading this one called The Devoted. And who's the writer? Blair Hurley?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was right in the middle of it. And it was one of those books where I was putting it down to just kind of savor it a lot because the writing is so rich. It's about the search for faith and truth. The basic plot is a young woman who is seduced by a Zen master. It's her pursuit of Buddhist truth and community, a Sangha, and this master. And the best feeling on earth as a person of books, as you know, is to get to voice something on people and to say, trust me, you're going to love this.
So talking about The Devoted, that book, it got me kind of worked up because that dynamic of this woman seeking spirituality and then the master using it for his own purposes and he relished in her unhappiness. You know, he says, you were built for loneliness, weren't you? Some people are. Were you always this way? And it's kind of a dynamic that makes me really angry where someone uses that type of manipulation with a woman.
Well, it's like so common in established churches, and certainly it's been the news in the Catholic Church for years and years, where spiritual teachers use their power to get you to satisfy them and to gratify them, whether it's sexually or whether it's in their ego. And that's the ticket, that convinced people that no one, like if men in my youth, younger days, if they said, you're the only person I've ever been able to talk to, what I thought was that was a good thing. I thought, and then later it's like, wow, look at all the pretty little red flags. Yeah, run for your life.
Alarm.
And what he was saying was there's really no one else that can ever give you the kind of safety and completion. But he's abusing her, and it's so sick and so sad, and yet he's so brilliant. Another thing I loved about the book was how much information she imparted in such an organic way where you didn't feel like anybody was trying to get information about Buddhism or the different tenets or the different realms or whatever. It just felt so organic, and yet I learned so much. And it was the kind of book, and I love this so much, that made you look up other stuff, that made you look up different forms of Buddhism or something in the Catholic Church or a saint, made you want to go look up and know more, but even at the same time that you're really nourished by what she's helping you to learn. I love that. Then the other one, Mrs. Bridge by Evan Cannell, is a book I have been foisting for 40-some years on other writers, and he was one of our best family friends. In fact, he was the first man I wanted to marry. I was underneath the table. I was 5 or 6, and my dad and him worked on this avant-garde literary magazine in Sausalito called Contact in the late 50s and early 60s. And Evan was the handsomest man I'd ever seen, and silent as the grave, So I just sort of grew up around him and didn't take it that seriously that he had become a well-known American novelist. But when I first read Mrs. Bridge when I was coming up at, say, 20, it gave me a whole new lease on life because it was a brand new way to write a novel. It's these very short chapters, which I happen to love, and it told me I could tell the story of a whole family and a couple generations and many decades in these very short takes. And the writing is so precise, which I love. I've always told my writing students, we don't want esoteric stuff. We don't want to figure out where you're going. We don't want to figure out if this is the same character even. I'm old, I'm tired. As soon as I had a baby, I was 35, I thought, I don't want to figure out stuff. I just want to get in bed and read. I want to go on a journey with a writer I trust, like a tour guide. And that book, Mrs. Bridge, is seemingly about these, it's kind of flat in the sense nothing happens. The mother, Mrs. Bridge, they're upper middle class, I would say. The husband's a lawyer. He's gone all day after every day. It's very 40s, St. Louis. And it's about her obsession with meaningless, with paper napkins, with the household, but this ache, this kind of pulse inside of her that there's got to be something here that she's missing.
I felt like I was reading about this erasure of a person. It's this steady decline that's faded, filled with lessons. I feel like I was watching someone just fade into the wallpaper, and it was kind of scary and
touching. I mean, you feel she's a tremendously sympathetic character, and she's who our aunts were, and maybe our grandmas. And to me, it's so tender. And Evan was not a tender or demonstrative person. I mean, the least demonstrative person I've ever known. And yet there's something so tender because it's really, she's mirroring our lives, that we want to break forth. We want to laugh more. We want to experience immediacy and air on our skin. But we're so busy and we've got so many emails to answer. She didn't have emails, but she's got the paper napkins, or when she gets really mad at her son, Douglas, when he uses the guest paper towels in the bathroom, it's me. Why did you use the guest towels? Now I have to go back out and get more.
Why do you think people should read this book now? I mean, it's a character study of a pre-feminist woman who lets her husband tell her how to vote. There's strained race relationships, class dynamics, and ethnocentricity.
Well, first of all, because of the beautiful writing and all of the truth about our human condition that Evan Cannell so captures, and the details are different. But I am I'm in recovery. I'm a sober alcoholic. And the women who helped me get sober, we just told each other our stories. And the details were completely different. But the themes were the same, that we're lonely here, that we tend to long for isolation, even as we simultaneously long for heart connection. And that, like some of the women who helped me get sober had been streetwalkers. And when I got sober, I already had 3 books published, and I'd been pretty successful in the world. But inside, I felt like a fraud, and I felt scared a lot of the time, and I felt people would get to know who I really was, and they would run screaming for their cute little lives, and that turned out to be what everyone feels. It's a common fear. And so Evan Cannell's writing is so clean. It's like he can tune the radio dial in so precisely, and to me, that's what I live for.
Well, thank you so much for having me over to Marin.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Anne Lamott's new book is Almost Everything, Notes on Hope. Books of Your Life is produced by me, Elizabeth, with Melissa Yeager-Miller. With production help from Jeremy Dalmas and Craig Billmeyer. Our theme was composed by Mia Schettino. You can find this podcast and all the books we discussed with Anne Lamott on Goodreads in the book group Books of Your Life with Elizabeth. Support for Books of Your Life comes from Audible, with an unmatched selection of audiobooks in every genre. Start a 30-day trial and your first one is free. Visit audible.com/Goodreads or text Goodreads to 500-500.